Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is my buddy Mike Bubb. He's going to share some stories about the years that he spent touring with Del McCoury.
The first time I ever saw Del in person, I guess, was 1985. There's two guys I was riding around with, Eric Uglum and Ron Block. Ron Block's well known through Alison Krauss in Union Station. He played with her for 30 years now. Anyway, the three of us used to go around to different festivals, and we'd compete in picking contests and band contests and things. But Billy Joe Foster, who was a fiddle player with Bill Monroe for a while, had told us about this band of Indians that played at this festival called McAllister Bluegrass Festival up in McAllister, Oklahoma. It was a family of indigenous, Oklahoma Indians, and they would let them close the show usually because they were drunk and they were chaotic. And they were the only people that were allowed to drink at the festival, apparently, because they didn't allow any beer at this festival or anything. But their antics on stage were just hilarious. And some of the regulars used to tell us, well, we used to turn our lawn chairs around and just watch the crowd laugh, because that's almost as funny as watching people's reaction to them. Anyway, we went there to see these guys. Buck Tanner was the guy's name, Buck Tanner and Company. They were a riot. They delivered as we wanted to. But also on the bill was Bill Monroe and the Osborne brothers and Del McCoury. So that was the first time I ever saw him. I sat right down in the front row, and I remember watching them drive in and everything. And so I'd always had been a fan. I heard the records from very early on when I was learning to play, when I was about 13 or 14. But that was the first time I saw him. And then later on, I got to know the boys in the band a few times. We'd run across each other. And eventually, I formed a band with Ron and some other guys, and we'd opened some shows for Del at the Birchmere. And of course, they would come to Nashville and come through Nashville on their way somewhere. This is after I moved here. And Del would just drop the boys off. They'd just stay a couple days or whatever through the week, and then he'd come back through the next week, pick them up, and take them to wherever the next festival was, So they would do that every once in a while. Eventually, they played a festival out at the Geo Theater in the Opryland Hotel, or Opryland Park, which was just right here. And so I was out there, saw the show, and was talking to Ronnie afterward, and he told me, he said, yeah, Mom and Dad are looking at property here. They're thinking about moving to Nashville. I was like, wow, fantastic. And he says, we're probably going to need a bass player and a fiddle player because they're probably not going to move here. I said, okay, well, put me on that short list, man. I said, I know all those choruses, and the job is basically playing bass and singing the baritone harmony parts to the songs, And he said, yeah, he said, I'm going to keep you in mind for that. So we sort of established that contact there for that. And then not long after that, I got a call to go to Japan and play in a band with a guy I knew from Houston who had a yearly gig at this, basically a tourist spot in the middle of this giant bridge called the Seto Ohashi Bridge, which connects Shikoku Island with the big island of Japan. Right in the middle of that bridge is the world's largest suspension bridge. It's like, think Golden Gate times 10. It's just gigantic. But in the middle of it is this little tiny island that they called Fisherman's Wharf. And it was staffed by students from a college in Michigan, all American kids that worked there. But it was all Japanese tourists that came through on these bus tours and stuff. And they had a American bluegrass music there. And the band leader was a guy named Dave Peters from Houston, Texas. Great flat pick guitar player and a mandolin player. And somehow or another, he had a connection through this college, through the people that did this, contracted the entertainment for this island, that he put together bands to go play at this place. And they had a guy that didn't want to stay. His name is Pat Cloud. He's a legendary banjo player, but it was a 9-month gig. You play 16 days, and then you have a day off. Then you play another 16 days, 4 30-minute sets a day. Not a very difficult gig, but, you had to get there by bus. And, of course, you just leave everything there. You didn't have to carry an instrument and everything because everything would be there. The banjo player decided he wanted to bail on it after 6 months. And so Jeff White, who later went to work for Vince Gill and now works a bunch with Lyle Lovett, he was over there playing this thing, and he's the guy that called me and said, hey, you want to come over here and fill out the last 3 months of this job in Japan? And I said, well, yeah. He said, I said, yeah, but I just talked to them, Ronnie McCoury, about taking a job with Del. I said, but I don't know when that's going to happen. And I decided to go ahead and do it. So I went to Japan for 3 months and played in this band called the Texas Rangers. And it was a great experience. And 3 months was perfect. I could see where going longer would be, want to come home or whatever. But anyway, I finished that, and then I got back here. And then I started playing out at the old Bell Cove Club in Hendersonville with Larry Cordell and Glenn Duncan. And they had a bunch of musicians kind of came through their regular band. They played on Wednesday nights. At the time, Glenn Duncan was at the height of his session work and was kind of doing less touring and just doing mostly studio work here. And, of course, Larry Cordell was writing hit country songs. And so they had no real aspirations to travel, but somehow or another they got a record deal. And they just played Wednesday nights at the Bell Cove. And what it was known for was that Bill Monroe would come every Wednesday night after church and go there and eat dinner. And then on the second set, he'd get up and play. And whoever was around could get up and play with Bill Monroe. It was awesome, or talk to him, or be around him. And this went for a couple of years. It was a regular thing on Wednesday nights in the early 90s. And so eventually I worked my way into that band and playing banjo. And we made a record. And it's called Lonesome Standard Time. And it was their first album. I played banjo on it. And then about the time that it came out was about the time that Ronnie McCoury moved to Nashville. He was the first one to come down, and he came in February of 92. And we had a regular gig on Tuesday nights at the station Inn with a band called the Sidemen, which was all guys that worked as sidemen in the Opry bluegrass bands with Bill Monroe, Jim and Jesse, and the Osbournes. And we had gone through some personnel changes and this and that. And Mike Compton was our mandolin player, but he took a job in New York and moved out of state. And so this position opened up in our weekly band. So Ronnie came in and started playing with that outfit. And we played every Tuesday night and sort of became a regular thing in Nashville and in the bluegrass world, because we would tell people about it at bluegrass festivals and they would come through Nashville and try to make it on a Tuesday night. And it was one of those bands that you just never knew. It evolved over the years. We did it for about 16 years. You just never know who was going to come and show up or sit in or be there, kind of thing, which is the station Inn's always kind of been known for. But because we had this regular night there, we had some amazing times down there. The night Doc Watson came and sat in with us, or Mel Gibson came in one night, and just random things like that would happen. But anyway, so now I was playing, in this regular group with Ronnie, and it was about May of that year that the position with Del finally kind of opened up, and so I went out and played one weekend with him at I want to say Beaver, Pennsylvania, and Memorial Day weekend of '92. And that's when I started with them. Basically, they said, "We'll use you again next week," So that's what started the role with Del, and I was with them for 13 years. We went through, it was kind of fun because, or not kind of, it was a lot of fun because at the time, Del was kind of a well-known bluegrass artist in the bluegrass world, but he was based in the Mid-Atlantic region. He was out of Pennsylvania. So really well-known there, well-known in the Northeast, and he would every once in a while go out west, fly out west and play a festival. But for the most part, he was mostly a regional artist who had been at it for a long time, but he was ready to make a break for it and get his boys established in the business. And so they made a move to Nashville, and he ended up moving down here permanently. And it was really great because Del was ascendant at the time. He had a band that was really... aside from his boys, me and Jason Carter really just dove into the music, And I have to admit, being a little green when I started, I had been playing professionally and such, but I had never really experienced playing bass in a band like that was had a big established repertoire, and it was a challenge and it was a lot of fun. And so I started traveling with them in '92. And we went all over the place. One of the first trips we took out of the country, we went to Japan and toured over there. he was really well known over there and popular with the bluegrass aficionados. Well, the thing about Del, and particularly for me, my dad died about 7 months after I went to work for Del. And I'd been in Nashville just for 3 or 4 years, but it really became a family to me, joining a family band, and you become part of the family. So that part of it, was really something that I needed at that time when my dad passed away. But on a day-to-day basis, Del is just one of the most gentle people you'll ever meet. And he's a hands-on kind of guy, that he wants to know what makes something tick. He'll take it apart, or if something's broken, he'll want to know how to fix it, And that was really inspirational to me because I had sort of the same, I don't know how to describe it, the attributes where I'd like to, tinker with stuff. But Del's a real inventor, and, he knew how to make tools that would work for him to do a certain job. And he'd always worked on his bus and, busted his knuckles on that thing for years. And, he would do tune-ups on a 672 diesel, which is a big, giant GM diesel engine on the back of his 50s GM coach that we traveled in. I was in it just a few years. He had it for about 16 years on the road. He figured it had 3 million miles on it. And it was a converted Greyhound bus, And that was sort of the standard of the industry back then as far as bluegrass goes. You get the 50s bus because they were just virtually indestructible. And later on, we made the upgrade to a Silver Eagle, which is like the next level bus. And I think they were still kind of common back then, even in the country music world. Eventually, I think they went out of business, and Prevost is kind of the premier bus now. Yeah, we'd always ask him questions about Bill Monroe because we were around Bill Monroe a lot. So at that time, we would get to visit with him and play music with him and see him here and there. And I actually played with Bill Monroe quite a bit during that time up until his death. I played the very last road show that he ever played in the Chicago area in 1995 before he had his stroke. And but that was nice, But I remember Del telling me, he said, when I was with Bill, he said, I was your age. I was 25. And he said, Bill was my age that I am now. But I thought he was an old man back then. And if you look at the pictures of Bill, he just kind of never really changed much. He just always looked like this statuesque father of bluegrass music, And that was kind of interesting. And now I'm the age that Del was when I worked for him, mid-50s. So it's kind of crazy how you see all this sort of generational movement. And it's been going on for decades in the bluegrass world, But, he used to talk about traveling with Bill. And, they were kind of more primitive back then, but they had a bus, I guess. And I think he said one of his first trips was like this unbelievable trip. They went to New York, then they had to go to Florida, and then they went to California, all in one trip. That's like circled the United States. And he said they had a guy driving them, and they came down some hill outside of Los Angeles or whatever. He said, we got to the bottom of that hill, and he said that guy pulled that bus over and was, shaking. And he said, I crawled underneath there. He said, I'd noticed those brakes on that bus had never been adjusted. But he knew what to do, He knew how to get underneath there and tighten everything up. And so he kept the old bluegrass breakdown rolling on that trip. But he wasn't there long. He was only there for a year and a half. And mainly because of the expense of being, having to either commute or live here in Nashville and go back and forth. It's difficult back then, the travel was a little more difficult. But he was there about a year and a half. And then not long after that, he made his first record at his house with a guy named Chris Strachowitz, who owned Down Home Music in California. And he just recently passed away, but his record label was called R. Hooley. And he put out all kinds of roots music, but he kind of discovered Del while he was with Bill Monroe and set out to make a record on him. And that was Del's first record, which is still in print. You can still get it. Well, like any artist, when they moved to Nashville, of course, they got a new booking agent. And we got with a guy named Keith Case, who was sort of the preeminent roots music booking agent here in Nashville. He had started in Colorado, but basically moved to Nashville to expand his booking agency. So it was a pretty big roster, and so we were on the roster with a lot of people like J.D. Crowe and the New South, the Cox Family, Alison Krauss, several others, and we would just, they would package us together, and we would do shows with these other bands a lot, especially ones that were on the same record label. We were on Rounder Records. When I started with them, we were playing sort of like the bluegrass places, the well-known bluegrass places, which are pizza joints and beer dive bars that have bluegrass in them. We would play some of those, and mainly festivals. And every once in a while, you get on some theaters and stuff, with some bigger names or whatever. But at the time, it was still, basically playing festivals and whatever theater and club work we would get in the wintertime. And that was also the start or the beginning of wintertime bluegrass festivals that were done in hotels. And we would always do those in the wintertime too. Then, as things started to go along, I distinctly remember when Jerry Garcia passed away, a real shift in the audience of bluegrass festivals. We started seeing a lot more young people showing up at these festivals, sort of born out of the Grateful Dead movement in a way. Mainly because bluegrass at that time was so accessible, You could just walk up to the soundboard and say, "You mind if I plug my tape recorder in, or plug into somebody else's tape recorder and make tapes," and that kind of thing. And it was kind of friendly to that at the time.
The artists were friendly with that also?
Yeah, because it was kind of common in bluegrass to listen to live tapes. Like collecting live tapes is just like a thing for bluegrass musicians. Then later on, I think, as the business sort of evolved and changed, and how easy it was to duplicate things or distribute things through the internet, they became a lot more careful about that, and a lot less and less of it. But as far as the audience goes, we started noticing a change. Just more young people coming to festivals, and particularly Del was attracting these young music fans, and don't really know how to put a thumb on it other than the type of music we were doing was traditional, yet we started taking other songs from outside sources and adapting them to Del's sound. And, one of the great purveyors of that was Jerry Douglas, because he had this sort of vision of how to take a song and make it another way. And there was one we were working on, I can't remember which one it was, but we were at his house rehearsing, and he had to take a phone call or something and left. And he says, "I don't know if this is going to work, and I got to go take this call." So he gets up and he leaves. When he comes back, we had it all figured out. And he was like, "It is going to work. Fantastic." It might have been Still Hot Smoking Gun, which was Robert Cray's song, yeah. And we just figured out a way to make it work. We were taking old country songs and making them bluegrass songs. We recorded several songs by a guy named Skeets McDonald, who I'd first kind of heard on the radio. Eddie Stubbs used to play his records, and he'd introduce him as Skeets McDonald, the great tax write-off for Capitol Records in the 1960s. He had never had anything but regional success, but they kept making these records. But he had just great material, great songs, and we cut several of his. And so back then, we were always hunting songs and trying to bring them into the band, from different sources and stuff. And that part of it was really fun because we got creative on a few things, and were able to just sort of find songs that really became part of Del's sort of signature repertoire. And one of them was, the biggest one that we did was a guy sent us a tape of a song called 52 Vincent Black Lightning, which he'd heard on the radio in New York. Listening to it, he's like, "God, this would be a great song for Del. It's got a great story. And it's got a great melody," which is the two key things that Del likes in a song. If it tells a story and it has a great, interesting melody, and it's not too common in the bluegrass canon, then it stands out. It's attractive to him, So sent us this tape, and we started working on that song, and we were making a record, and it didn't make it on the record, and so we didn't record it. We just sort of ran out of time. We filled up the slots for the record, so it took 2 more years, and then we came back around to that one. and we recorded it, and it just, for some reason, just blew up and became a hit in bluegrass. I mean, it got outside of bluegrass. And I remember going to see Richard Thompson here in Nashville at the old 12th and Porter Club. And he didn't do that song until the very end. And he said, 52 Vince, after he finished, he goes, it was like 8 months at #1 on the bluegrass charts by Del McCoury, you know. And I was the only one in the band that went down there to see him. But I just remember him, you know, I thought that was just really cool that, you know, he knew that. He knew the success of the song that was going on outside of his own version of it, you know. And I guess, you know, maybe that was because he started getting checks or something, or his manager told him or something, you know, hey, take a look at this, you know. Later on, we met his manager, and he sent Del a bunch of CDs, and we pulled a few more songs off of there and did a couple more Richard Thompson songs. His music is really, you know, he's a great guitar player, and he plays sort of in a finger style, which sort of mimics, you know, banjo a little bit, and so it's not a stretch to hear his music and adapt it to a bluegrass sound, you know. And he tells these great stories too, so. Yeah, we did 3 or 4 of his songs, I think, and sort of became a good source for a couple of years there. That's one thing I say about Del. He's very fearless and he'd try anything, you know. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, well, we'll just move on. But you got to try everything, you know, to find something. You find that needle in the haystack, you know. And so that was kind of fun, being able to be a part of that and finding songs and contributing to that repertoire, you know. I think I made 5 records with him, and, you know, I brought songs to each one of them. So we had seen Doyle Lawson play on one microphone at a festival. I remember one time we were in the studio with Bill Vorndick was our recording engineer, and he said, you know, he used to run sound at festivals back in the 60s. In the early days of the bluegrass festivals in the 70s, he was at a lot of them running the sound or working in the sound crew. And he says, I'm the first guy to ever put monitors on stage at a bluegrass festival. And I just remember Del going, so you're the one, because he hated monitors, you know. And when we saw Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver play on one microphone, it was like a revelation. Like, wow, you can actually do that. You know, what does it take to do that? Well, it takes a certain kind of microphone. And they had some other outboard gear that they ran it through on the stage to keep it from feeding back and that sort of thing. But we didn't have any of that stuff. We just went out and bought 2. We started with one of them, and then we got 2 microphones. And eventually, that's all we used was 2 microphones. Old school, no monitor. And it has its limitations, but the positive parts of it are far outweighed by the limitations of it, you know. So I remember we started playing all these like rock clubs and college towns in the Deep South, and eventually we wound up playing in LA at the Roxy, which is like a famous nightclub there that a lot of famous rock bands have played. They usually do like a pop-up show or, you know, pre-tour show there, and legendary place. So we walk in there, we waltz in there, and the sound guy is a complete prick, you know, and he's just like total asshole right from the get-go. And I'm the guy that has got to interact with the sound guy. So he says, how many DIs? I go, we don't have any DIs. How many vocals? I said, well, we all sing, but we just sing around one mic. How many instruments? I said, we're a 5-piece bluegrass band. I said, let me explain it to you. I said, we have 2 large diaphragm microphones, and that's all we use. I said, we mix it ourselves on stage, no monitors. And I said, you just got to turn it up out front. We take care of the rest. That'll never work in here, he says. I'm like, well, you know, this is what we do. And I said, this is how it's going to have to be done. So let's set them up and see what we get, see how it works. So we set the microphones up, you know, and he's got, you know, total doubts about it all. And we did the sound check, and I said, now look, I said, when you get some people in here, I said, it'll absorb a little bit more, and you'll be able to get a little more gain out of it. But I said, right now this will work just fine. So We get on stage and we play the show. Great show. Had a big Los Angeles crowd, no telling who was there. There was a lot of, like, Tom Petty's band. Some of those guys knew who Del was, and they would come out to shows. And we would see different people, L.A. is L.A. You'd see people show up. Anyway, we get done with the show, and the sound guy, I go back to thank him, and he says, "Dude, that was unbelievable." He goes, "Listen to this." And he had recorded the show. He starts playing it back over the sound system right after we got done. I'm like, "Hey, man, turn that off." I said, "We don't want to hear the show again." I said, "They don't want to hear the show again." He goes, "I've never seen anybody do anything like that. That was unbelievable." And that was just part of the process, is that sometimes you just had to make these guys believers that it would work, because they never had any experience like that. They're used to miking amplifiers and, using DIs and plugging people in direct and all that kind of stuff, where it's almost safe, Even to this day, it's hard, when you say you want a microphone, sound guys say, "You sure you want to use a microphone?" It's like, well, nothing sounds better than a microphone, truly, But anyway, you had to make them believers, and that was one experience where, it was common that getting some of these clubs, and they're just used to these, touring bands that just come in, and they just knock heads immediately. You try to out asshole each other from the get-go for dominance during the night. We really kind of took that to a whole new audience, like being able to just play on two microphones, no monitors. And people would say, "Wow, I went and bought one of those microphones, but all it did was feedback." And you go, "Well, how far were you standing from it?" "Well, we just sort of made a semicircle behind it." It's like, no, you have to get up in the microphone. So the way it would work was we kind of figured out our sort of our dance on stage, our choreography, and how when it was just one microphone, it would be me and Del to the left side of the microphone. And then the fiddle, banjo, and mandolin would just rotate sort of clockwise. It would come in to get the pickup notes from behind, and then go out to the right, and then the next player would be able to come in, or singing, or whatever was next. Then eventually we got two microphones so we could get more of the sort of the fill work between, the singing and that kind of thing, just sort of expand the instrumental side of it a little bit more. But we still did solos around the one mic at that time.
From an audience perspective, there's an excitement to that.
Well, yeah. You hear that all the time. It's all of a sudden we're moving. And most bluegrass groups, they stay at their station. They have their instrument mic and their vocal mic, and they never move. That's it. And this, all of a sudden, you got all this exciting stuff going on stage, and you can watch, all different things going on, and it's kind of fun. It's not as just as staid and motionless, not emotionless, but just motionless on stage. It really adds a lot. These days, you got to compete with at a bluegrass festival, you're competing with bands that play a lot louder. Some carry drums. Bluegrass is such a broad term now. It's not just a 5-piece standard 6-piece bluegrass band. And drums and fog and lights and all this other stuff. And so it takes a lot more to compete with that on two microphones. That's where its limitations are. You can only get it so loud for the impact, and so you want to be careful about, who you follow, because if you follow some big, loud band, you're going to sound finally kind of small after them. So you always want to play before those guys, But now they've kind of fixed it where they've got somebody in control of a really good sound guy, and they've been able to augment that with lower microphones to catch the rhythm guitar better, or the backups and that kind of thing. They don't have to scramble around quite as much. But there's still a lot of movement on stage, though, and they still sing around one microphone. And that's old school. That's the way it used to be. You see the old pictures. And, crappy sound systems of the 50s and 60s was a Shure Vocal Master and a couple of microphones. If you watch the Beatles at Shea Stadium, you can just imagine, like the guys that designed that sound system that thought that they were going to be able to broadcast to a stadium full of screaming people. And you look and you see these big speakers, sort of tilted up to the stands, and they're out there singing on some SM58s or whatever it was, Shure microphones of some sort at the time. and nobody could hear a thing, you know. No wonder they didn't want to play anymore. We didn't have any of those problems, but it really became more efficient playing on 2 microphones. You know, our sound checks were really quick. They were either frustrating for the sound guy or not, you know. Well, the leaving of the band was pretty difficult. I think it was for all of us. And it basically came down as, you know, there's 2 ways to leave a band. There's the graceful way, and then there's the ungraceful way. And sometimes you don't have control over what happens as far as the grace goes. But we had a situation where management had been encouraging us, the boys, to start a side project, to get something going on the side that would augment the Del McCoury Band playing less dates. So Del played less dates, and we would take up the slack, this other band. And so when we initially started talking about this, there wasn't a lot of traction. And like 6 or 7 months went by, and there was no real communication amongst us about what to do and how to go about that. And again, you know, I'm telling you from my perspective and my experience, there's probably a lot more about this that I don't know about, which is their conversations and their idea and their perception of what that should be, you know. But we just got to a point where we had a meeting and it just didn't go well. And everybody sat at the table, I mean, just us and the management, and it just got real frustrating trying to come up with what that was going to be and what that would look like. And
was Del there?
No, he wasn't there. But we were leaving the next day on a trip. And so, you know, my idea was I thought that we should make a record that just featured everybody in the band, the Del McCoury Band. It was just, we made a record called Del and the Boys. And I said, why don't we make the Boys and Del, which is us collaborating with Del on our own record. And then we would have this body of material that we could go out and play with other players to come in and do it with us, but establish that, you know, as sort of a stuff that we could do on stage with Del. We'd have a record that we could sell that would be ours. And again, was establish, you know, 12 songs that we could go out and do on our own. And that didn't go over. You know, it was like the management thought, well, do you think you're more popular than Del McCoury? I said, well, no, but I said, we are the Del McCoury Band. You know, we have fans too. There's people out here that follow all of us, you know. And he just didn't really see it that way, you know. So that idea was not, it was dropped pretty quick. And that was about the extent of my input, you know. And but things just got, you know, it just got a little heated at that meeting, and I was just frustrated, you know, with this whole idea of, you know, who's really going to be in charge of this side project, you know, because there's 2 ways the music business works to me. There's all for one and there's one for all. So we're in an all for one situation. We work for an artist, he pays us. Some of them are family, but, you know, we're the band, he's the artist, and we're all there to support and promote him and the brand of Del McCoury, which we did and was very successful at it. Now to take this next group and go, now you guys are going to be, you know, are we partners or how's this going to work? You know, we never even got that far then when I was there. And, but I didn't understand how it could work, you know, like how do we go from that to the other, which is one for all. We're all going to share in this thing. We're going to share expenses. We're going to share income. We're going to share. Are we sharing or are we working for somebody, you know? That was never detailed out. So that was part of the unknown stuff. But we never got that far. I didn't get that far because 3 days later, I was out of the band. And I quit because we had a situation where just, you know, on a sound check, the next gig we played and probably made some crass comments that I could have avoided making, but it made some people upset. And then the next thing you know, you've got the ungraceful exit coming up from the band, and it kind of forced everybody's cards, you know. And I just decided at that point that I didn't need this. I didn't need the stress of, you know, trying to please a couple of different people. And that, you know, I had never really gone against anything that they'd done, but it was just a difficult situation, and it caused enough electricity in the air that it just wasn't going to, you couldn't keep going. So I decided to leave the band, and that's what I did. And so we came back off that trip, and I was no longer in the band. And they were leaving a couple days later for California, play the Fillmore and play Grass Valley Bluegrass Festival in California. And so they had to scramble to find somebody to go. And Dennis Crouch ended up going with them, and they kept offering the job to Dennis, but he didn't want to take it. He didn't want to go on the road at that time. He was really getting set up in studio work at that time, so he just didn't need to travel that much. And so eventually Alan Bartram took the job, and I encouraged him to. And the amazing thing is, when you look back on 30 years of Del McCoury, he's only had one personnel change in his band, and that's been with me and Alan. And that says a lot about Del McCoury and the Del McCoury family and the kind of people that they are, There's not a bluegrass band out there that can beat that, really. Well, it wasn't long after that I went out to a festival in Colorado because I was booked to teach. And usually they hire bands to teach at this week-long workshop out there. And I didn't want to lose that because it paid pretty good. So, and I quit in May. So it was like I had the whole summer evaporated in front of me. Which also included the Newport Folk Festival, Carnegie Hall, dream gigs that I just still to this day haven't gotten to do, but I missed out on them that summer. But you got to take those as your part of it. But as I say, if you stay in the business long enough, you'll play them all. So still practicing to get to Carnegie Hall. But I remember we went, it was uncomfortable. It was like a divorce, It was very emotional for me. And I know it was emotional for those guys because we were a very close-knit group of people, We spent a lot of time together, traveled the world together. Our social lives and our professional lives all interacted together, We're all about the same age. I'm talking about the guys in the band. I was the oldest, but we were all in each other's weddings. We were all there when we had our first kids. We all bought our first houses together about the same time. We did all these rites of passage as young guys in their 20s and 30s. And when you all of a sudden just put the brakes on and it just stops, period, stop. It's emotional. It's like a divorce. It's like a terrible breakup, And so I felt it a lot. It took me a couple of months to kind of get over kind of losing that, not just the job, just the camaraderie and the family and the whole social side of it. It was very, very woven together, and then they had the same problem too. I mean, here we had done all of this stuff together, and as I say, ascendant in the music world, and had really got Del established, and was starting to work outside of all these other places. Like we played the first Bonnaroo, and we did the Jammies in New York, and we collaborated with all these different people. It was really a lot of fun. And but to just have to go replace somebody that's been there that long, 13 years, it's really hard. And I'm sure they tried a couple guys out, but they finally landed with Alan, who was a great bass player and a great singer. So it was kind of a no-brainer once he kind of came into the picture. His problem was that he would just started a band, which is now known as the infamous String Dusters. And he had been on some of their very earliest gigs and recordings that they made. They were getting this thing started. And then he just had to pull the plug on that, on those guys to take this sort of regular job, I say regular, but music job. But it's all worked out just fine for everybody. And, coming out of that, I just turned 40. I had just become a dad, and I quit probably the top band in bluegrass music all in my 40th year. It was like very stressful for me. And so I didn't really know what to do. And so what I did was I went and got a job at Home Depot. They used to have a place here called Expo Design Center, which is at the time was a high-end Home Depot where they would, instead of DIY, do it yourself, it was we do it for you. And they had all kinds of high-end stuff that they would sell, tile and whatever. And so I worked there for 2.5 years. I was able to get insurance for my family. And then, I thought, I tried to find another job in music, and I made a few calls here and there. And then I just found out that, I'm never gonna step into another situation like I was just in. I just played with the very best of the best there is, and had the experience of all of that came with it, And I wasn't going to replace that easily. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to wait and let the music come to me. And so I just stayed in town for about 2 years. And then eventually, slowly, people started calling me because it sort of takes a little while for word to get out. I mean, up until even a year or two ago, people would ask me, how's Dell and the boys? And I'm like, well, I haven't been with them for 13, almost 20 years now, or whatever it is. And but that news sometimes travels slow. You realize when you play for somebody for 10 years that, to me, it went by in a blip. It went by quick. As I say, the days are long, but the decades are short. And so for a fan who only sees you maybe once, maybe twice a year, 10 years is like an eternity, But for me, it just went by so fast and continues to. So after about 2.5 years of working at Home Depot, I started getting more calls to do things. And finally, I got to the point where I realized I don't have to work at Home Depot anymore. I can actually make better money playing music.